Murders, Mysteries, and Conspiracies with author Glenn P. Klinger III is presented by the Florida Pickleball Clothing Company. For all your pickleball clothing, go to floridapickleballclothingcompany.com. Now, with today's murders, mysteries, and conspiracies, here is author Glenn P. Klinger III.
Hey everybody, it's Glenn, and I want to welcome you to yet another installment of Murders, Mysteries, and Conspiracies. If you are a returning listener, I want to thank you for giving us another try. If you are a first-time listener, then I want to tell you, if you're looking for a program that looks at specific events, whether it is a murder, a mystery, or a conspiracy, or just an event in history, and want to understand it better, get a better idea of what happened, then you're in the right place. I try and provide as many angles as I can into what happens, allow you to go out and find your own information. I'll provide you with all my sources or references, things that I looked at. You can look at it yourself, and then together maybe we can solve a mystery, or at least get a better understanding of what happened during that event. And I think that being a mystery writer, many of you know I've been writing since about 1993. And by doing that, I tend to look at things in their entirety, but I also break them down into a logical sequence of events. And I think that helps me look at these events differently than a lot of people would. I think that history is just one big story and one big book. And if you can sit there and take it apart and understand, chapters and understand the sections of that book, you get a better understanding of the world in general. And it's good to educate yourself. I think it's always a positive thing. And we need to think. There's things that happen in our country, in our world, that we might not understand. And times are changing constantly. Things change constantly. And having an understanding of the world around us, and specifically history, gives us a better chance at not making the same mistakes that were made back years and years ago. So I think you need to think about that. I had a professor in college who kept repeating the old slogan, he who fails to learn his history is bound to repeat it. And I think that is very, very true. Today, I'm talking about what is probably what I feel is one of the pivotal moments in world history that took place in Germany. As many of you know, I'm a big World War II buff, and understanding that period of time is vital to understanding how that country collapsed, how new governments came to power, and how that happened very, very quickly. I'm sure in the minds of the German people, they never ever thought that their country in 1930 would be in the state that it was in 1945. And we as a democracy, republic, to whatever you want to call us, we need to, have a say in our government. There's a lot of people in Washington that they want to go up there and they want to lead, and they don't really do it with their constituents in mind. Never lose sight of the fact that the people that are up there working, and you see on all these TV talk shows, work for you. They work for you. They work for me. They work for the taxpayers and the people of this country. We give them the opportunity to do that by voting for them. So don't ever think that they're better than you, or they're somehow able to make decisions for you, because a lot of the times you know better than they do. They just happen to run and get elected. Today I'm going to talk about a series of events, and it's basically two specific events that allowed Germany to go from a democracy to a dictatorship, and Hitler rise to power. And the result of that was the death of about between 60 and 90 million people. The U.S. spent $4 trillion in today's dollars, fighting that war. And it was a catastrophic mess. All these people that died, the Holocaust and all those things that happened, was all orchestrated very, very deviously by Adolf Hitler. Hitler was able to, and his Nazi party was able to come to control that country basically through intimidation and force and playing on some very, very smart methods of propaganda. I did a very good podcast on propaganda. A guy named George Creel, who was an advertising executive in the U.S., and he was hired by Woodrow Wilson to get America into that war, World War I. They were against it, and they powers that be, whoever that may be, wanted the U.S. in it to end it. We lost a lot of people in that war, and they talked people into it. They convinced them that we needed to be over there fighting. Did we? Probably not. Why would he get involved? But they used a very well thought out, well orchestrated propaganda campaign to get people on board with it. And people fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. So you need to think about that as we look at how Germany got messed up. And that's basically what it is. So after World War one of the conditions of the armistice Woodrow Wilson set on the Kaiser is he had to give up his monarchy. So Germany was a monarchy. And the Kaiser agreed to leave Germany in exile. He went to Holland. And the German Reichstag, which is similar to our Congress or a parliament, okay, they were responsible for signing the peace agreement, the Versailles Treaty. So the politicians of the Reichstag agreed to form a new government. They wanted to form a democracy. And so 83% of German voters, including women for the first time, were able to vote, turned out in January 1919 to elect the National Assembly. Now, the purpose of the body was to write a new constitution and negotiate a peace treaty with the victorious Allied powers. Now, the National Assembly began its sessions in February 9, 1919 in a small German town called Weimar. And it's about 100 miles from Berlin. They thought the city was safe from extremists, and they worked on the Constitution for several months and finally agreed to adopt a republic. It's a representative form of democracy. The so-called Weimar Republic included two legislative bodies, an upper and a lower house, very similar to America. The members of the upper house were appointed by regional governments. Each German state sent representatives to the body based on its population, very similar to our government. The upper house approved or rejected laws passed by the lower house. So, we have guys in Congress and it goes up to the Senate and congressmen do one thing and senators do another. They have to approve. There's a certain process there. So after the Reichstag election, the political party winning the majority of seats formed a new government. And this is like any other parliament in Europe. One party rarely won a majority in the Weimar Republic. Two or more parties had to agree, which is good. You got to have people working together. It's kind of a coalition. And after the coalition was formed, the president of the republic chose a chancellor to put the government together and lead it. The chancellor was the leader. The president ran the show. And it's kind of the hierarchy of things. And the Reichstag elections were held at least once every 4 years. But like any other parliamentary system, if they failed to win a majority, then they could call new elections. They could just keep calling it back. And sometimes they would meet twice a year. So it kind of depended on what the situation was in the country. The people elected the president for a 7-year term. In addition to appointing a chancellor, he was the one that called the elections, and he was the commander in chief of the German military. The Constitution gave the president the power to temporarily suspend constitutional rights and let the chancellor rule by decree when there was a state of emergency. Those are two very important things that were going on. Germany didn't get invited to the Versailles Treaty negotiations, and they got hammered. World War I was very bloody. They didn't permit any German troops in the Rhineland. They put severe limits on the number of soldiers in the German army and banned German warplanes, submarines, tanks. They're trying to keep this from happening again, is what they were trying to do. Put all German overseas colonies under the control of the League of Nations, required Germany to pay these huge war reparations to the Allied powers. So hardcore Germans looked at this as a slap in the face. They thought it was war guilt. They were being shamed for being in the war, and they didn't feel that the sole responsibility of the war should be placed on them. And that's what was happening. The German public strongly opposed the treaty. They didn't like it, and they didn't agree with it. The Reichstag elections in the new Weimar Constitution took place in 1920, January. And more than a dozen political parties competed for seats. And the strongest of these parties was their moderate Social Democratic Party, which won 22% of the vote. You had some jockeying going on. 1921, Britain, France, and Belgium and Italy settled on a reparations sum that would burden Germany with enormous payments for decades. So they were going to really be hammered. But the United States didn't participate in the reparations plan since the Senate had refused to ratify the Versailles Treaty. Unwilling to increase taxes to make reparation payments, the German government depended on foreign, mainly American, short-term, high-interest loans to pay back these things. And so the way they paid for these loans was they started printing money and the German paper currency. They had to pay their workers. So in order to pay their workers, of course, they started printing money. They were printing all that money for COVID, and inflation has shot up. Everything's more expensive. This is inflation that's really, really hard to understand. It's called hyperinflation. And what you're seeing is, okay, so July 1914, for every US dollar, it took 4 marks. So you have 4 marks to every dollar. By January 1923, it was 353,000 marks for every dollar. By November 1923, it was 4 trillion marks for every US dollar. So what does that mean? It means pensions are wiped out. People's personal savings was gone. Now what you'd saved for decades, 30 years of your career saved in a 401k, you couldn't even buy a loaf of bread with it. It was that bad, that quick. You're talking a short, very short time frame, all because of some things that happened due to the war. Now, as the crisis increased, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, so these guys were socialists, National Socialist German Workers' Party. So when people call for socialism, you got to understand that the Nazis were a socialist party. Okay, they attempted to overthrow the government in Bavaria, and Hitler was arrested. He was the head of this little gig, and he got arrested and thrown in jail. And that's when he wrote the book Mein Kampf. It was My Struggle, is what Mein Kampf is. And he basically put out his political manifesto. It's his long-winded, blowhard fest about what he was going to do to run the country. And the book was amazingly popular. I mean, it was really, really popular. So I guess when people are starving and they don't have any food to eat, they can't afford a loaf of bread, they're going to listen to people who are saying, hey, I can change this. I can make it better. And that's the problem. When you have hard times, you have people step up and take advantage of it. So they wanted somebody strong. They said, we want somebody that's strong that's going to come in and take over. And they also persuaded the moderate parties of the Reichstag, persuaded the old Prussian military hero, Paul von Hindenburg, to run for president. Hindenburg was 78, which is old back then. It's not so old now, but he won because he was a big hero. And right-wing people like Hitler believed that reparations were part of the war guilt lie. So they didn't want to pay reparations to anybody. The U.S. stock market crashes, and it's bad everywhere. Another German government took over in 1930 with Heinrich Brüning as the chancellor. When Brüning and President Hindenburg declared a state of emergency and attempted to rule by decree, the Reichstag passed a law opposing this. So he was trying to get back he wanted to rule, he wanted to be the monarch. In 1930, the Nazis gained 100 seats. They became the second strongest party in the Reichstag. Now, Brüning returned as chancellor in 1930. The German employers cut wages and laid workers off. Brüning increased taxes and reduced unemployment benefits. Now, President Herbert Hoover secured an agreement among the Allies to postpone all international war debt, including German reparations. Now, that's a big step because that allowed the Germans to not have to pay those huge, overwhelming debt because of what was going on over there. Germany never paid the payment. The Nazis had gotten a steady increase in seats. In May 1920, the Nazis had 12 seats in the Reichstag. In September 1930, they had 107 seats. The effects of the Great Depression, mass unemployment, people looking for parties to solve the solution. They wanted somebody strong to solve it. They had 107 seats. By July 1932, they had 230 seats. Hitler used propaganda effectively, and the Great Depression caused economic turmoil. In November 1932, the Nazis lose some of their seats, but Hindenburg reluctantly appoints Hitler as the chancellor. And he's trying to get Hindenburg to dissolve the Reichstag and call for a new parliamentary election. What Hitler wants to do is he wants to abolish democracy altogether by passing the Enabling Act. Under the Weimar Constitution, the president could rule by decree in times of emergency using Article 48. During the election, the Nazis alleged that Germany was on the verge of a communist revolution. And the only way to stop it was to put the Nazis securely in power, to let them run the whole deal. So he wants to get the Enabling Act. He wants to get the emergency powers by Article 48. I was talking to a young person the other day, and I don't believe they even had heard of this event. I don't know if they're teaching in school or what. But this is the pivotal event that changed the course of history. I mean, I really think it changed the course of history. And that's the whole premise of this podcast, is the Reichstag fire. Now, the Reichstag fire, if you've never heard of it, happened on February 27, 1933, shortly after 9 p.m. Hitler was sitting with Joseph Goebbels at his house having dinner, and he gets a call saying the Reichstag's on fire. The Reichstag building is similar to Parliament in England. It's similar to our Capitol here. Imagine if those things burned down. I mean, it would be a big thing, especially if it was deliberately set. They get in their big black Mercedes that they had, and they drive up to the Reichstag, and it's on fire, and they're immediately met by Hermann Goering, who was already there. And he was the interior minister of Prussia at that time. And he told Hitler, this is communist outrage. And they arrested one of the communist culprits. Hitler called the fire a sign from God. He said it claimed that the signal meant the mark of the beginning of the communist revolution. What's funny is the head of the Berlin Fire Department. This guy's name is Walter Gemp. He was in charge the night of the Reichstag fire, 27th of February. He personally directed all the operations of the incident, tried to put the fire out. Now, on March 25th, 1 month later, he was dismissed for presenting evidence that suggested there was Nazi involvement in the fire. So what this was a false flag event. A false flag event is an event that somebody does, and then they blame it on the other side in order to make their position strong. Okay. It happens all the time. They do it. The Nazis did this effectively later to start World War II. They faked the Polish attacks on Germany in order to have grounds to attack Poland and roll into Poland in 1939. So it's very, very bad. Now, Gemp said that they had delayed him from doing his job, notifying the fire brigade, that he was forgetting to make full use of his resources at his disposal. So he couldn't fight the fire. He didn't have enough people to fight the fire. He wasn't given all the assets he needed. So they wanted it to burn. They wanted this thing to burn down. So they had their excuse. In 1937, this guy, to finish his story, Gemp was arrested. Despite his appeal, he was in prison. He was later killed in prison, 1939. So he tried to stand up for what he felt was right, and it didn't work out for him. What was the political consequences of this Reichstag fire? The day after the fire, at Hitler's request, President Hindenburg signed the Reichstag fire decree. That allowed him to put it into law by using Article 48. There's the Article 48. They got to that of the Weimar Constitution. Now, the Reichstag fire decree was a gigantic overreach by government. It suspended all the civil liberties in Germany, including habeas corpus, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, the right of free association and public assembly, and the secrecy of phone calls and mail. They could look at your mail, listen to your phone calls, whatever they wanted to do. And it also banned publications not considered friendly to the Nazi cause. Now they controlled the media. Okay. The guy that they arrested was Marinus van der Lubbe. He was a communist, Dutch communist, who they said, oh, this guy set the fire. They started pointing the finger at him. They arrested him and a few other people. The other people didn't get executed. This Mr. van der Lubbe was executed for this crime. And what happened was the Nazi propaganda, which they were very, very good at, fabricated stories that this was part or the beginning of a gigantic communist revolution in their country. And the German population went into a panic. These people were so panicked that they isolated these communists further from the civilian population, and they started arresting these people. They arrested 100 to 200,000 political opponents, people that didn't agree with them, and put them in concentration camps or reorganization camps, or whatever they want to call them. They killed 600 people, just killed them because they didn't agree. Now, they even arrested the people that were in the leaders of the Communist Party in Germany. So now these guys, all those seats that they had in the Reichstag were dissolved. There was no way to stop it. So with the communist electoral participation suppressed, the communists had polled at 17% of the vote. The Nazis were able to increase their share of the vote in March 1933, the Reichstag elections from 33 to 44. And it gave their allies, the German National People's Party won 8% of the vote, majority of 52% in the Reichstag. So now they had 52%. And they wanted to get to 2/3 vote. They had to have 2/3 vote in order to vote in the Enabling Act. Okay. What they did was the Social Democratic Party was the only party that had enough power to vote against the Enabling Act. So Hitler sent his stormtroopers, his paramilitary SA, the brown shirts, and they intimidated, harassed, or kept these members of that party from voting. And the Enabling Act passed. And these guys were able to roll in there. Von Hindenburg died. Hindenburg died shortly thereafter that. He was old. And Hitler named himself Führer. And he basically took over. If you want to look at it realistically, from 1928 to 1933, they went from 12 seats in May 1928. So that 5-year period in November 1933, they had 661 seats. The Enabling Act means all other political parties were banned. So it's basically a dictatorship. They went from a democracy to a dictatorship, 5 years. The Nazis won all the seats in the Reichstag. They kept these people from voting. They erased their votes from the toll, so that way they could get to 2/3. It was an interesting way they did their math. Was Marius van der Lubbe guilty? Well, he was a pyromaniac. He was a troubled young man. He had a lot of mental issues, and he was in an infirmary. Now, in 1955, an affidavit surfaced by a stormtrooper who testified that the building was already on fire when van der Lubbe was delivered by the SA members. So they think they just put him in there and just dropped him off. Now, the funny part is you remember who was there when the thing started, when Hitler got there? Goering, right? Hermann Goering was there. Well, Goering, a man testified later that was at the Führer's birthday in 1943, and he testified at the Nuremberg trials that Goering stood up and during the conversation, the Germans were talking about the Reichstag building and how artistic the value was to them. And he said, this is a quote from Goering, "The only one who really knows about the Reichstag fire is I, for I said it," and unquote. And after saying this, he slapped his thigh. So under cross-examination, the Nuremberg trial, he denied it, but he actually was involved. So in March 23rd, 1933, the Reichstag met at the Berlin Opera House to vote the Enabling Act with the Aisles packed of Nazi stormtroopers. The Reichstag voted to end democracy in Germany and make Hitler dictator of what he called the Third Reich. Now, these people, during their democratic times, they had it pretty good. The democratic constitution had a Bill of Rights. was one of the most progressive in the world. Many Germans belonged to well-educated middle class, made up of business owners, government workers, professionals that normally flourish in a democracy. Political parties freely competed in elections, but democracy failed. And they were able to take over because of the work of a few people. Hitler goes out and now he thinks, okay, I've got to cement my position. And his paramilitary group, the Brown Shirts, paramilitary SA, was headed by Ernst Röhm. June 30th, 1934, Hitler now sees them as an enemy because they could have a military coup and take him out of office. So what does he do? He has an event called Night of the Long Knives. The SS goes out and kills all the heads, including Ernst Röhm, who had been a big supporter of Hitler, kills all the heads of the paramilitary SA, the Brown Shirts. So that way he has total control and history goes from there. But it's a scary time. The Reichstag fire decree and the Enabling Act were the foundation of the Nazi dictatorship. And that basically was what allowed him to come to power. So as you look at this event, keep in mind that these things happen, but they don't happen in a vacuum. I mean, other countries have seen these type of things happen. So just be cognizant of it and learn from history. It took longer to set up the 5-year period where they rose from basically nothing to having total control. So think about it. I'd love to know your comments on it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Murders, Mysteries, and Conspiracies. And until we have time to chat again, take care, and I'll talk to you soon. This is Clark.
You have been listening to Murders, Mysteries, and Conspiracies with author Glenn P. Klinger III, presented by the Florida Pickleball Clothing Company.com.